Why were there so many social MMOs and virtual worlds that young kids could be a part of in the 2000s? On this channel, we have now covered a number of these, and until I actually started making videos about them, I had no idea and could not comprehend just how many there was. I think a part of that might be because I'm from the UK, and whilst we did have a ton of virtual worlds ourselves, the number that were accessible and known to UK kids was nothing compared to that in the US. For example, I had never ever once heard of Lineplay, or Fantage before I started making long-form video essays. And another game similar to this that has been actually mentioned by you guys a couple of times and I've seen floating around on web pages and in forums is ourWorld. Now I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys, and you might be surprised because you're now watching a video about it, but I had absolutely no interest in making a video on this game at first until I started doing a little bit of deeper research and I realized exactly what the site was. ourWorld stood out to me not only for its visual design, but also the way it took two incredibly lucrative products of the time and combined them together to create the unique ourWorld experience. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look into the history and life of ourWorld, what made it so loved, and why did it eventually close for good. And spoiler alert, it's not because of Jess. There is a few disclaimers for this video. We are going to be briefly mentioning subjects relating and about and other subjects around that might make you feel uncomfortable. So if that is something that you don't want to hear about right now, you can skip this video completely, or I will leave the timestamps in and I will pre-warn you when I start talking about them. Also, we are going through a heat wave in the UK at the moment. I have my window open. There is building works literally going on just behind my building. And as usual, I always ask at the beginning of my videos that if you do find yourself enjoying today's content at any point, that you consider dropping it a like and subscribing to see many, many more videos just like this one. But without further ado, let's jump straight on into the history of ourWorld. So we're starting our journey in 2006 at what could be argued the start of the golden age of online gaming. As we look at more and more games like ourWorld and social MMOs, there does seem to be an emerging pattern of business people with some backing trading out their initial ventures or positions to chase after the tech moneymaker of the time, which was online games. It's kind of crazy to me in retrospective that virtual worlds and casual games had such a grip on not just the gaming industry, but the tech industry as a whole. And as crazy as I find it, you also don't have to be a genius to see why so many people were trading out their initial businesses to invest into the world of online gaming. Mies and Club Penguin had huge success, especially with outside companies investing in terms of marketing and branding and finding new avenues of getting new customers. Obviously, virtual worlds had the potential to be incredibly lucrative on their own, but when these big companies started coming in and doing marketing campaigns through them, it really did inflate this and brought a lot of people into this industry with their own virtual worlds and new ideas. And Flowplay, the developer of ourWorld, was created with this intention by Derek Morton and Douglas Pearson with a community-first philosophy. Development for ourWorld began in January 2007, and in just over a year of development, the game was released as a public beta in April 2008. It was set to be managed by K2 Network, who would deal with all of the behind-the-scenes logistical stuff while the site was running. They did have a couple of other huge MMOs underneath their wing, so they were very experienced in what they were being set out to do. ourWorld was also backed quite well with funding from Intel Capital, angel investors, and interestingly enough, the creators of Skype. Now on release, a lot of response from the tech and gaming industry to ourWorld was actually very underwhelming. And I think this is most likely due to the fact that the virtual world and social MMO catalog was becoming very oversaturated. Understandingly as well, people really struggled to see how combining casual flash games and the virtual world could be beneficial for ourWorld and Flowplay. Serafina Brennan comments on this: Flowplay is confusing us as to how they will grab people into their world with casual games. There is also the hurdle of players knowing that they could play these games on newgrounds.com. And many other sites just like this. For example, Big Fish Games or Miniclip or even Girls Go Games were three very popular sites at the time that had a lot of traffic and were allowing players to access a bucket load of casual games. And I know casual games were not the sole focus of ourWorld, but initially it seems that it was a big selling point for Flowplay as to how ourWorld was different from other sites. VentureBeat also responded to this as well, and they spoke about how they appreciated the game design, but also reflected on the lack of fresh content, especially given the amount of competitors that were emerging in the industry. Actually, this outlook wasn't even specific to outsiders alone. Flowplay themselves, specifically Derek Morton, commented on how they worried for the longevity of their new business. As entrepreneurs, we set out with big ideas and ambitions, but little certainty about the reality of our long-term viability. But despite worries and concerns, ourWorld would release in 2009 and hit the 5 million user mark in just 2 years. So to see why it was so popular, let's take a deeper and more detailed look at the game itself. As a social MMO, ourWorld was packed with things to do. We will get into these different assets individually, but first let's take a look at the lore and visual design of the game. ourWorld actually has similar world building and lore to Fantage in that it is set on multiple floating islands, and these act as the individual environments that players can visit. In ourWorld, according to this game lore journal entry, Azia, I'm going to choose to pronounce it as Azia. I don't know if it's Azia. Apologies. From Downworld, like Earth, founded a substance named Flow. They literally injected this into the ground of Downworld, which then created the distinct islands that make up ourWorld. Basically, they just took their favorite parts of essentially what is Earth and made it float in the sky. Problem solved. Maybe that's the solution to climate change. Maybe we just separate the different countries, take them out, and then that's it. We're not moving to Mars, we're creating new planets. Azia is kind of presented as a very smart or scientist-like character, and they basically are the pioneers and creators of ourWorld. They intended it to be a place of fun and freedom for the outcasts and teenagers, basically, of Downworld, expressing themselves how they wanted and having a great time whilst doing it. And how you had this great time was up to the individual player. But we already know that ourWorld's initial standout feature and selling point was that it was specifically focused on performing as an online social environment integrated with casual gaming. And if you watched my Cake Mania video, you will know how in the mid-2000s, even in the early 2000s, the casual gaming market gained unprecedented growth. So the fact that they did this and combined the popular virtual world with the casual games is kind of predictable, but also kind of smart. According to Flowplay, they featured over 200 games covering tons of genres. Action games like Raft Wars, which was one of my favorite Flash games that I played. Puzzle games like Buried Alive, matching games like Bejeweled, and strategy games like Trade Winds, who I didn't realize that was a Flash game. Not only did they actually feature casual games and Flash games in their site, they also had in-game crossovers with the aforementioned Cake Mania and also Diner Dash. And even though, as I discussed, the Flowplay site argues that the combination of Flash games and the virtual worlds was a big part of its success, I actually think there is a totally different reason as to why the site was attractive to its target audience. The first thing I personally noticed about ourWorld was its visual style and design. And please don't be cross with me for this, but I'm not the biggest fan of the art style that ourWorld has. It's very busy, it's very loud. I love the promotional art that they have. The characters on the banner of ourWorld look really, really cool, and they give a sort of anime, mid-2000s cartoony vibe to them, kind of like Cartoon Network-y. And this in itself is really, really appealing to me personally, and I can imagine a lot of other people. Maybe it's just because I'm an adult looking back at this. When you actually go into the game and you compare the NPCs in-game to their promotional art counterpart, it just falls so flat. But on the flip side, I'm not a game developer, but I can understand logistically and resources-wise why they did this. And they definitely redeem themselves in other ways, specifically with the clothing and fashion, which again, we will talk about in more detail a little bit later on. Looking at avatar creation, they are fairly simple to make initially. Besides the avatars, I do really like the seasonal decor that ourWorld did. And I always love a virtual world that when there is a seasonal event going on, it goes over the top with the decorations, changes every aspect of the site that they can. And specifically Halloween for ourWorld was really, really nice to look at. It's really reminiscent of 2000s childhood Halloween decorations and the vibe that came with Halloween as a kid. No matter how I feel though, I can understand why some people and fans of ourWorld would enjoy the environment and setup of the site. And this in particular is the thing which I think, other than the Flash game inclusion, really did help ourWorld stand out and be popular with its target audience. The vibes and aesthetic really remind me of Mies, and it has a tone where it's mature enough to be cool, but not mature so much that it's exclusively only appealing to adults. It's a hard balance to reach in obviously making something appropriate for that like awkward age gap between like 13 and 17, where you change so much in those 4 years, and to hit that theming correctly is like a tricky one. And I think Flowplay did do this really, really well. Like, it feels way maturer than Moshi Monsters or Club Penguin or Bin Weevils. Now, the second thing I picked up on, other than the environment, was the crazy amount of stuff that there is to just do in ourWorld. I feel like probably in terms of scale, it's quite similar to Club Penguin in that each different environment has specific activities or games that you can engage in, characters to talk to. But I feel like ourWorld has a specific amount of world building, which helps flesh this out and make it feel way more immersive. So ourWorld features numerous locations. I think there's 8 in all. These are Boardwalk, which is where the player first spawns and kind of acts as a introductory environment for players. There's also the Pier, Soho, Electric Avenue, Wonderland, Nevermore, Beat Street, and Vegas World. Each of these is distinct and has its own environment and theming, roleplay areas, accessible games, shops, and native NPCs who can also give players quests or missions. As it goes in other social MMOs too, these environments are also available for players to just stand and chat in and interact with other players. I specifically like that each area has a shop and NPC then associated with it. I think it adds another layer of detail and life to ourWorld that allows players to align with specific environments and interests, sort of hitting that part of development and like adolescence where you're kind of finding yourselves and your interests. And virtual worlds could be a safe environment for people who felt like they couldn't express themselves truthfully in real life. They then could in these virtual spaces. The huge world to explore, the NPCs to engage with, and the vast amount of activities to take part in were a big draw for players of ourWorld. But one of the biggest things is definitely more material. ourWorld's biggest element by far was undoubtedly its fashion and clothing. Hair, tops, bottoms, one pieces, coats, shoes, gloves, and all other accessories were all purchasable in-game through 8 shops. These were defined by a specific style, each of them having their own one. For example, Colette's shop, Sugarstar, sold more feminine pieces, and Edwin's Skeleton Key was more dark and emo. And there were thousands of items available for players to access and purchase in-game. According to Flowplay themselves, there were over 32,000 virtual goods in the whole game. And I feel like you'd assume, from an outside perspective, at that rate of production over however many years ourWorld existed, that the quality would be kind of subpar and would be passable, but nothing to like write home about. I think this might be one of the most consistent but varied availability of fashion in any social MMO that I have looked at. Obviously, a 2D outfit is a lot easier to produce than a 3D one. Some of these pieces are incredibly detailed and also from really like niche interests. You can really tell that the clothing and fashion element of ourWorld was something that Flowplay invested in. And because of this as well, I think you can really tell that Flowplay had a really good understanding of exactly who they were targeting their game to. I think there was a really big potential to be incredibly lazy with the clothing in this game. And I think a lot of this is obviously due to the players who created the outfits. Other than player testimony, there are a few elements that, other than my understanding of the site, that support how popular and big a part of ourWorld that fashion and clothing was. The inclusion of the photo booth for users to share outfits in and outside of the game, and player-run fashion shows being a very popular pastime on the site. Individual players hosted themed competitions for a prize, which was usually a small amount of gems and a piece of clothing. There was a lot of creativity going on here from both the hosts who were coming up with the competition theming, but then also the entrants who came up with their, obviously, like, outfits to enter into the competitions. This shows exactly how passionate players were about their avatars and the fashion of the game. As expected, this fashion and clothing did not come for free. There are essentially 3 different types of currency in ourWorld: flow, gems, and coins. Admittedly, flow isn't a currency. You can't buy furniture or pets or clothing with it, but you could exchange it for coins, or you could exchange it for XP to level up. It was earned by interacting with the environment, like going on the diving board, playing minigames, or buying a flow shovel. There were also cheat codes available to increase the amount of daily flow that was received by players. In terms of actual currency that players would use to buy items in-game, coins were earned by playing games, selling items, or winning contests, and gems were the premium currency purchasable with real money, gift cards, or weekly gem codes, which were a big thing that players were like really hyped about and discussed online. There was even whole websites dedicated to people posting the codes like as soon as they were released so that as many people could access free gems as possible. You could also watch adverts, which is such a nostalgic thing for me. I used to be a really big fan of Sims Free Play, which I'm actually planning about making a video on, because the fact that that game is still running and is lucrative is wild to me. You could watch adverts to earn gems. You could like basically share and market the site for free gems. There was many ways that you could do this. Surprisingly, the price of gems and coins stayed pretty stable over ourWorld's entire lifetime. I couldn't find any examples or any players expressing frustration at like spikes or inflations at any point. If you did play the game and you know that this did happen, obviously please do let me know. But I couldn't find any examples of it online. And what's a social MMO without a class system? So there were 2 forms of paid membership in ourWorld: Residency and Zoe's Club, with the latter being the more exclusive. Residency was either purchased with real money or with gems. According to the ourWorld wiki, Residency passes were either monthly payments of $5.99, 1 month prepaid for $10, or 12 months for $49.99 online. And interestingly, they also offered Residency memberships in-game for gems and enabled players to trade Residency. When you buy a pass or a membership in-game with gems, it does lessen the amount of privileges you get, but it's also a nice way for people who don't have like high household incomes to be able to get in and involved with that more like premium side of virtual worlds. But I can also see how people could use it as leverage or blackmail over another player, which you might think I'm being dramatic, but... And with Residency, you could get an amount of gems depending on which type of pass you purchased, a larger condo, which I think was called a Mondo condo, 1 item for it per month, so like furniture for your condo or wallpaper or whatever, the ability to trade with fees and host parties, access to exclusive areas like the beach and Soho Park, and the ability to level up faster through double flow earnings. Zoe's Club had either a monthly subscription of $20 or 1 month prepaid for $30. I think they did introduce yearly payments at some point of $199, which is a lot, but honestly doesn't even shock me compared to Line Play's amounts. There was also the ability to buy a Zoe's Club membership with 600 gems in-game, or you could also trade it. You didn't get any gem allowance if you did it this way, but you got access to all of the other privileges, which I guess kind of makes sense because you're not actively spending like real world money on the game, so obviously they're not going to give you the premium currency, but I feel like they could have still given you a little bit. With a Zoe's Club membership, you get a large amount of gems per month, no fees on trading, an exclusive auction place to trade, a platinum star marker next to your player name, a 100% permanent flow boost, you could have groups of up to 8 players, access to Zoe's Club shop, which had limited or discounted items, along with the previously mentioned exclusive areas. Now, neither do I feel that the price of currency or for membership was extortionate or like really, really cheap. It's kind of like a nice middle ground that isn't like, it doesn't feel like it's extremely overcharging players. I do appreciate that they had the separate tiers, so they either had Residency or Zoe's Club, which enables people to access the premium side of the game at different price points. Naturally, as does come with class systems, it does create entitlement and elitism, which I don't think was a huge thing with the membership specifically. I think it happened in a different way, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I also feel like there is less like sneakiness with the selling tactics and marketing. There is a little bit of me that is a bit weirded out by the prepaid thing, where you get a bigger amount of gems instantly than if you do the like rolling monthly subscription, which you'd think it would be the other way around, that they would give you more gems if you like signed up for a subscription and were therefore likely to spend more money. But then I also do understand that the prepaid membership was like $10 more expensive. So if someone buys a prepaid membership every month, they're obviously going to spend more money than if they're on the rolling subscription. And this doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with freemium models, microtransaction heavy games. By all means, I am not. But it's nice to see that they weren't overcharging players by a crazy amount. I feel like now anything is going to seem like a nice amount compared to line play. Bless that game, because now that I've looked at it, everything is just going to be compared to it after how expensive that game was. There was kind of a gacha element with ourWorld. ourWorld was literally hitting all of the points that you could hit for a virtual world. They had mystery boxes, and I don't think they were pushed very heavy in the game. They were definitely an element of the game that people took part in and spent money on, but they weren't like huge. Like you could buy fashion pieces from the shops, which were easily accessible. Like you didn't have to do mystery boxes in order to get new pieces. We're now going to move on to player experience and progression in ourWorld, and this is like an overall look at all of the little elements that came together and things that players could do in ourWorld to make the experience as a player. Leveling up is quite a big part of ourWorld, and obviously is a feature that we see across a ton of games, and not just MMOs specifically, but in MMOs they were a way to kind of keep players active. And to encourage them to play more and do more in order to have more. It is also nice with the leveling up in ourWorld in that with each level you unlock different items. So you unlock a different dance move with each one. Like I know the animations of ourWorld were quite a big element of the game that players loved. There was also vehicles that you could unlock which didn't have a specific boost. Like they didn't help the player at all. They were just kind of like a cosmetic thing. But it's nice that with the in-game leveling up, if a player couldn't or chose not to purchase a membership that gave them that premium experience, they could have the sort of exclusivity and the feel of that through leveling up instead. It's interesting to see the duality of having levels but also membership and having them kind of like battle out to see which one will have more influence, because in a lot of other social worlds, like I know in Club Penguin, if you were a VIP, that was a pretty big thing. Much of it was cosmetic, and you would see people with these items that you know were VIP walking around, and you'd know what they were, and that was quite a big thing. Whereas with leveling up, the higher a level a player is, I guess the more kind of like respect you have for them if you're a big fan of the game. Areas of the map were also locked until specific levels. The Pier and Soho were unlocked at level 2, Electric Avenue at 6, Wonderland at 8, Nevermore at 10, Beach Street at 12, and finally Vegas World at level 14. This is a strategic system, definitely. I think it helps to work as a tutorial and encourages players to explore and access all parts of the site with the like excitement of unlocking a new place and being able to explore a new place. But it also retains players very well. Kind of drip feeding the content of a site is good at allowing players to build up a community and relationship and connection with the game before they've had a chance to explore everything and kind of run that initial excitement and motivation dry. And the true fans of ourWorld seem to have a really deep connection with the site. A lot of people outside of the game would go on and create their own content. Now, this isn't specific to ourWorld alone, but I think with ourWorld, I've seen the most amount of like big content creators than I've seen with any other site. For example, there was Donny Pie, who I think is one of the biggest creators I've seen, who I know they have their own drama, and I think they were banned from the site for saying something inappropriate. I'm not sure. We're not getting into it. Smiley Freak, who their content has been invaluable. Without their videos, I could not have made this video. So thank you so much. And also Miss Random Kelly. These were three like pretty big creators who had quite a large following and pretty like consistent content coming up from ourWorld. Other than like big content creators, there was also smaller creators who would make music videos, story times, there was blogs, information websites, which also have been so helpful, not to mention, of course, the wiki pages, which are created by like fans and experienced players of the game. There was so much going on outside of ourWorld, similar to other sites. Just the sheer amount of content and blogs and websites that popped up whilst I was researching is a testament to just how loved and passionate people were about the game. As an MMO, obviously socializing was a big part of the player experience. Players were actually encouraged to form essentially co-ops or crews, which would boost in-game earnings of flow or currency. Crews were like basically little communities that enabled players to form online groups, which, as much as it had a positive effect, I think also encouraged pack mentality and entitlement and exclusivity. Like, there were some people who you can tell spent way too much time online and took their groups way too seriously. There's also other groups that had basically trailers advertising people to join their group or crew, like the Sovereign crew. You could also send hearts to players, which I think you had like one heart that you could give to one person. And players could also earn popularity points by, I think, giving gifts or receiving gifts or both. I'm not sure which way it worked. Fleshing out the player experience further, as is often seen across many social MMOs, is role-playing. It just seems to be a common thing that people who join virtual worlds enjoy. Role-playing is popular across many virtual worlds, whether it is encouraged by the site or not. Thanks. Whether it's encouraged by the site or not, it is a popular thing across the people who tend to enjoy sites like this. Now, ourWorld did encourage roleplay. There were specific locations like the coffee shop where I think it was called Buzz, where you could be a barista for like 15 minutes and earn a little bit of currency or flow. There was also the Cake Mania stand in Wonderland where you could basically play out a Cake Mania level, but at your own pace. And there was also Flo's Diner in Electric Avenue, where you could be a waitress. There was the ability to marry another player or adopt another player as your child. Now, you can probably tell by my tone of voice and maybe my face that this is not something I am a big fan of, but we're about to get into why. On the face of it, marriage roleplay and adoption roleplay is a innocent thing. I have no problem with it when you know exactly who you are engaging in this roleplay with. I work with kids, young children, and having roleplay and imagination is a really important part of development and understanding how to communicate, how to play, your preferences in your interests, and finding out like your identity. I know ourWorld is not the first space to implement this practice. Obviously, we've mentioned Roblox, and I know a couple of other virtual worlds and MMOs also have this mechanic in place, but since ourWorld is the first one that I've covered on this channel that actually has it, we're going to look at it a little bit critically, along with some other darker sides of ourWorld in the next chapter. So this is where the warning and disclaimer is coming up. If you don't feel comfortable talking about grooming, things related or similar to that, skip to this time point where we will be talking about something else. We will get on into hacking and scamming on ourWorld after this. So marriage and adoption in ourWorld was introduced in 2013. And as mentioned, it allowed players to assign relationships with others in-game. On the face of it, it's innocent, and it enables players to explore different roles, build up communities, or like virtual families with players that they've got friendships with online. Like, on the face of it, it's innocent. But it does open up the door to some less innocent and harmful interactions to occur. Like, it's all well and good that it's potentially filling up a void for people or enabling people to have relationships that they don't have in real life in an online space, when consent can be misinterpreted so easily. And the reasoning behind why someone is partaking is a little bit blurry. It just does not sit right with me. We've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. I will mention it in every video about an MMO, that MMO and virtual world spaces inevitably did open up the door to some dangerous and harmful people to enter these sites with morally questionable goals. And it should be no shock or surprise to anyone that ourWorld as a site was not exempt from this, and having an in-game mechanic like marriage or adoption can enable, and in some cases actually validate, these behaviors for some people. Like, I can imagine there are some people watching this right now who don't understand why I have such a problem with this, and played the game, engaged with this mechanic and didn't have a single issue, but this is not the same for everyone. And it would be naive to believe that it was 100% used innocently. I think a lot of people like to avoid discussing or excuse people's experiences when it comes to things that happened on virtual worlds. Like, although these things aren't physically happening in real life, no one is being physically hurt. No one is literally trapped in a room with a malicious person. That doesn't take away from just how upsetting and distressing these experiences were. Unsolicited discussions or descriptions of inappropriate or adult behavior with children is incredibly harmful. And sometimes this does in fact go just beyond the screen and the computer. I actually found an example of this specifically with ourWorld. I don't know if they used the marriage mechanic in game, but besides that, their experience building a relationship with someone on ourWorld led to real world consequences. Now, I have got their permission to share their story, and they have chosen to stay anonymous, which is completely understandable given how traumatizing their experience was. Essentially, they formed a relationship with someone online, met up with them in real life, and they turned out to not be the person they expected them to be. Not only did they have a relationship with this specific individual, but they had multiple relationships that the other individual was not aware of. They ended up living with them for a short period of time, but eventually found their way out and back home. Now, to this day, this person is still affected by what has happened to them, and the fact that this person did this to them is terrifying. I hope that the individual who allowed me to share their experience briefly has managed to find some sort of healing or process which enables them to move on from that traumatizing experience that they've had, even just a little bit. And this is just one example of how virtual engagement can reflect and transpire into real life events. And like I mentioned, I don't know if they did use the marriage mechanic and they were married in game, but it just goes to show that without these mechanics, people were forming relationships, but having this thing and this part of the game enabled, it does encourage players to do this, which obviously can be used innocently with two consenting people. As seen in literally any other virtual world, or not even a virtual world, just a virtual space, hacking and scamming was a really big part and problem in these games. In fact, some people actually cite hacking and scamming as the reason for ourWorld's closure. One smaller example of a scam that I found in ourWorld is a player who was getting married and was handing out invitations through PayPal. I don't know if they were actually charging for wedding invitations to their virtual ourWorld wedding. If they did, that's a crazy hustle, and I kind of respect you, whoever you are. I found a video of this kid like advertising it, and I don't know if this is perhaps the child who was getting married, or whether he's just like, it's a friend of his on ourWorld and he's getting married and he's promoting it for him. It's just hilarious to me that someone was potentially charging money for tickets to a virtual ourWorld wedding. However, on a larger scale, there was a lot of bigger hacking and scamming going on in ourWorld. Specifically, there was a lot of people who would go around basically rinsing players' accounts and trading their items into their own account. Basically, they would enter a virtual version of the person's computer, enter their account, and then trade all of their items to their account for like a very limited amount of gold. And then when the player would come online, all of their items would be gone. And in consequence of that, all of their resources, money, and time that they'd put into collecting those items was also gone with it. If you played ourWorld, you might be screaming Jess or Darkening Winters at the screen right now, and I promise you we will get on to discussing them and their hacking career on ourWorld. And because they play such a big part in the ending of the game, I am going to discuss their time on ourWorld there. But first, I want to talk about the progression of the company and the game overall, leading up to this point. The first few years after its release, the popularity of ourWorld grew pretty steadily, and it had a pretty large and committed player base. And the success of the site must have been noted by other brands and companies, and Flowplay made 2 partnerships in the following years. One with PopCap Games, known for Bejeweled and Plants vs. Zombies, in June of 2009, and then another with Miniclip, which was one of the biggest casual flash game sites to exist. Because of these partnerships and also the sheer amount of players that had joined the site, ourWorld began expanding beyond what it was, introducing the Critter Garden in 2010, which introduced a hatching mechanic similar to Moshi Monster's Moshlings. Things that you actually hatched from the eggs in the Critter Garden were more for profit rather than to keep as pets. I think you could keep them as pets, but people would rather sell them and make the money than keep them, because you could buy much more appealing and nicer looking pets from the store. And you could also race these in the Critter Derby and basically bet on each other's critters. As discussed before, in 2013, we had some pretty big updates with the marriage, adoption, and popularity mechanics. And 2015 saw the release of the ourWorld chat app, which enabled players to engage with the site without being on it, like talk with other players and also purchase currency. Now, thanks to ourWorld's success, Flowplay also began expanding the company as a whole. In 2011, they released Downworld, another MMO aimed at tweens, but RPG based with combat instead of the more like fashion focused. Unfortunately, it ended up closing down in 2013, but I'm not sure what went wrong. I think it had a lot of potential and the premise of it was really, really interesting. I personally don't know another like kid-friendly site that was like this. I can imagine that there probably was somewhere that I'm just not aware of, but I feel like it was pretty good. And given the popularity of ourWorld, I'm really surprised that Downworld didn't take off more than it did. I don't think it completely flopped, but more that they found success in other places, which were far more lucrative. I know they also released a Facebook game in this time. I think it was called Groove, which had some minor success, but the real success came from their release of casino-based games. The almighty Vegas World, which opened in 2012, this site is still running up until this day and is insanely profitable and is just kind of full of older retired individuals who love a bit of bingo and a little bit of gambling. Why did I say it like that? I think a lot of people who played ourWorld and are looking for that nostalgia kick have actually gone to Vegas World because they took a lot of the fashion from ourWorld and put it into Vegas World. Not all of it, obviously, but the vibe and idea is still kind of there. And it is still a social MMO, like virtual world, just with much more of a specific focus on gambling, poker, and the world of the virtual casino must have been incredibly profitable for Flowplay very quickly, because not only did they release Vegas World and a couple of other casino-based titles, but they also began a white label service in which they would produce complete social casino virtual worlds for businesses and developers who basically couldn't create their own. And even though the casino life was probably providing them with a lot of income and enough for them to probably sustain themselves as a company without anything else, they still decided to keep ourWorld running. And I think it shows that they did really invest into ourWorld and care about it. I think they mentioned that it had a special place in the company because it was the first thing that they created. So they were less willing to just like close it down and shut it off in favor of something that was more profitable. And it is nice to see a MMO that wasn't necessarily just turned into a cash cow, which is kind of a blessing for the fans and players of ourWorld, considering what massive world event was just around the corner after the 2010s. As we all know, the big C of 2020 meant that people could spend more time at home investing in their hobbies and interests. I know for me and for so many other people, gaming became a big thing again, and a lot of people who didn't have time as adults to game like they did when they were teenagers were able to return to it and finally play those games that they'd been wanting to play for a long time. And another thing which kind of popped off was virtual worlds. So a lot of people now had time to play virtual worlds like they did again when they were kids or teenagers. And ourWorld was one of these sites that benefited from people being shut inside.
I think gaming has filled a lot of the social needs for people that they didn't have access to during the pandemic. I mean, you know, being able to go online and just feel like you're in the room with other people and feel comfortable about that versus being in a pandemic situation where you really don't want to be in a room full of people, in a crowded room for sure.
Now, the resurgence of players wasn't anything crazy. It never ever hit the numbers that it used to, but it was enough that people were talking about the game again. People were now able to go back to the site and finally afford that Zoe's Club membership or residency or be able to buy themselves currency. So the game was becoming slightly more profitable again. And for me, it's kind of poetic and ironic that a game that a lot of parents probably tried to pull their kids away from to go outside became something that gave people an outside in a time where they couldn't go outside. And I think overall, other than this, a lot of ex-players were just really glad that they had the time to return to a nostalgic childhood favorite that they loved and be able to invest proper time in it and just feel like a kid again. At the end of 2020, other than very obvious world events, Adobe Flash Player finally packed it in and closed down for good. Even from the beginning, it wasn't very stable, but it was good enough that Flash games could run on it and companies were willing to use it in the development of their products. But as it got older and outdated, it became more and more dangerous and the security of Flash was being questioned more and more. And I think the final nail in the coffin was the official release of HTML5 in 2014, which had been around for a few years. Flash then began dropping out of circulation in 2017, and by December of 2020, it was completely shut down. Now, I think I mentioned, I don't know if I actually did, but obviously, ourWorld, as expected, was developed and used Flash to run on a browser. Flowplay's reaction to this was to create a downloadable version of ourWorld so players could still access the game. And it sounds like a great fix, a quick fix. It's great in theory on paper, but in reality, it was not so great. For many players, the client was pretty much unplayable. It was extremely laggy and slow, and it also lost a lot of elements that players really loved, like specific games, like Dance Planet, Splatterbox, and 8-Ball Pool. Now, there was a modded version released, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. Not long after this, on the 24th of October 2021, ourWorld officially closed down, meaning the client lasted for little less than a year. Flowplay put out a message stating that, "We hoped it would never come to this, but we are going to have to shut down ourWorld. Bad actors have made it impossible to support any longer. We have kept ourWorld alive this long because it was our first game and it had a special place in the history of our company. Thanks to all of you who have suffered through all the challenges with the game. Watch this URL, someday we may be back with a new version of ourWorld, but for now, it's time to say goodbye and thanks for all the fish." I don't know about anyone else, but I know it was very common for the companies behind MMOs to release a little statement like this, but this one is the first that did not sit right with me. It feels very unprofessional. The tone feels very rushed and honestly quite childish, especially the fact that they cited bad actors in the game being the only reason that the site is closing. It looks like they're looking for someone to blame and not naming, but using bad actors as another term for basically hackers or scammers feels like a really low blow and a really crappy thing to do when you look at the other elements that were going on around Flowplay and the game at the time as to why the site probably closed down. Now, I feel not many players knew this, but before ourWorld closed, Flowplay was actually going through some pretty big administrative changes. Flowplay actually sold itself to Wind Creek, which was a virtual and land-based casino owner in 2021, the same year that ourWorld shut down.
And we did meet the Wind Creek team probably 7 years ago as part of that process. But at the time, we were eking out, a couple $1 million in profit. And so we weren't that interesting to them that the Wind Creek guys came back to us with interest because now had gone from a couple $1 million EBITDA company to, a 12 and $15 million EBITDA company. Yeah, we're a subsidiary of them now, but we're still called Flowplay. Our paychecks still say Flowplay on them. We still work for Flowplay.
And it's not like this was a spur of the moment, OMG, quick, we have to sell the site because bad actors are ruining the game for us, so we have to close it down because we can't run the game anymore. No, Flowplay was actually looking at selling since 2020. They state on this GeekWire article about the selling of Flowplay to Wind Creek. "We did the buyback after an exhaustive effort to find a buyer in 2020 came to an end with no takers. Wind Creek got back in touch with us over the summer with an interesting take on our business and a way forward to grow the company even bigger." And I genuinely think that this closure of ourWorld was part of a condition of this. If you keep up with the drama around the closure of ourWorld, you may know that others have their own speculations, keeping very much in line with ourWorld's statement of bad actors. Now, I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible because this video has already gone on for very long, but a lot of people tend to blame the aforementioned Jess or Darkening Winters for the eventual closure of the game. They were a player of ourWorld for quite a long time, and they presented themselves as a white hat hacker, which essentially means, if you don't know, that they hack for moral reasons. Normally, white hat hackers are people who go into the dark web and expose the details of people who share illegal or immoral or damaging material. And Jess presented themselves as someone who prevented scamming and hacking on ourWorld and also put down bullies and wrongdoers. But despite these claims, a lot of people have some very negative feelings towards Jess and their actions on ourWorld. Now, there's definitely two sides to this story, and I haven't decided quite where I sit yet. I'm still on the fence, but the subject was very widely discussed on Reddit about a year ago between one ex-player who had made a very, very passionate post about how they felt that Jess was completely to blame for the closure of the site. And Jess actually themselves came to defend themselves in this post. And there is a massive long thread of an argument Feel free to go and look at it if you want to. I'm not about to go into the ins and outs of their discussion because that would genuinely drain my will to live. The person who made the post spoke about how they worked with the CEO, apparently, to stop Jess and would help ban their accounts as they were going about their white hat hacking the wrong way, banning people or taking away items from people without any reasoning. People would basically just go up to Jess and say, this person bullied me. And then Jess would immediately just go and basically clear out their entire inventory or ban their accounts without any evidence. They also claimed that Flowplay was very aware of Jess's actions and wanted to keep them out of the site. And I know I'm kind of making light of this and like I'm laughing and I have like quite a jokey tone, but there is definitely some things they state which could have some truth behind them. And a lot of people do back them up in the comments and say, my friend got banned, they didn't do anything wrong, which definitely could have happened. I think Jess's situation is really, really interesting to look at when you don't have any nostalgia or experience with ourWorld as a site. Now, I'm not saying that Jess was completely innocent or free from blame and that they never did anything wrong. From what it seems, there's a lot of people coming out with genuine seeming stories and truths about what Jess had done. They also did post some very questionable things, but I think we've all been there. We've all maybe overshared online or put something online which we now majorly regret. No one is free from the internet footprint curse. And I don't think it's fair to attack them on this behalf, even if some of the things they put are a little bit questionable. I genuinely think that Jess, Darkening Winters, whatever you want to call them, basically self-made a role of a protector for themselves, for ourWorld. There is a little bit of like savior complex going on. Like they didn't have to do this. No one made them do this. They went about it themselves and they made it very, very obvious online that this is what they were intending to do. They made the YouTube channel where they shared all the things that they had done, how to hack, the fact that they were like morally stopping hacking. Like there's definitely a little bit of a savior complex. I think they basically just gave themselves a role that in the end they couldn't handle, and instead of making decisions with actual basis and evidence, they just kind of like went on a whim and trusted too blindly in what people were telling them and made some wrong decisions. I think definitely the going onto people's accounts and changing their bios and putting why they've been banned specifically was a little bit too far. Like we didn't have to do that. Now, I do think Jess had a role in the closure in that they brought to attention how fragile and unsecure the client actually was. Given the videos that they'd made on YouTube, I genuinely think Flowplay saw this and were like, crap, this is not gonna fly. Like this is not okay, this is not secure. And I think just sort of exposing this side of the client, despite what they did to people in the past, definitely helped Flowplay make a decision, especially the fact that Jess was sharing this online and so people could see how they were doing it, which obviously just opens up the door for more people to join in. Like they definitely had a role, but they're not the only reason. And it's very silly to think that way. I think they knew exactly what they were doing when they had bad actors as the sole reason for the site's closure. Like they knew that the heat would be passed on to someone else. Given this and their notoriety and the combination of ourWorld's closing statement, literally targeting basically scammers and hackers, and then specifically them because of how well known they were, it's no wonder that people blamed Jess specifically for the closure. If you think about it with a little bit of critical thinking, there is tons of reasons why MMOs shut down. Virtual worlds cannot exist without some form of player funding, basically. They cannot just exist off of their initial funding that went into the development of the site because it's not there anymore. It went into the development, that's what it was for. A virtual world has an expiry date, and ourWorlds happened to be, and probably should have been, a little bit earlier than 2021. So we'll never know for sure 100% why ourWorld closed down, but I think given what we've just spoken about, it's easy to see that it was a combination of different factors. 1, a drop in players and income, inevitably. 2, the change in ownership and company focus. 3, an increase in site vulnerability after Flash closure, which was brought to the attention of them by Jess or Darkening Winters. And 4, a proportional increase of hackers, bots, and scammers to real players. Now, there is a rewritten version of ourWorld being produced, and I have seen rumors and mentions online that it is being produced by Jess or Darkening Winters. So given how controversial and difficult to discern how truthful they are being, like who's telling the truth, who is lying, I am not going to go out and tell you to wholeheartedly support this if you love ourWorld. I have supported rewrites in the past and like verbally expressed that you go and search them out if you want to, and that's backfired. So I'm not going to do that anymore, basically, for any rewritten projects, unless I know the person who is making it themselves and I know that they are doing it for the right reasons. Obviously, if you do want to go out and find this, there is links on Reddit pages and out there somewhere if you do want to support Jess and what they are doing. I just feel like rewritten versions of games, very sadly, are ending very quickly because people get that quick burst of nostalgia and then they don't return to it again. Or the people who are going out and reproducing these are just doing it to monetarily exploit people, basically, sadly, which is really sad that people are preying on people's like inner children and childhoods and like lost passions, I guess, and interests in order to get money out of them. But unfortunately, it is happening. So just be careful who you support and who you give your money to. That is going to be it for today's video. I really do hope that you enjoyed looking into the history of ourWorld with me. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you did find yourself enjoying today's video at any point, that you consider dropping it a like and subscribing. Liking my video really helps it in the algorithm, and subscribing means that you never miss out on a nostalgic video of mine. But for now, I'm gonna love you and leave you. Hydrate to stay great, get your daily calorie intake, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.